In this video, I'm going to talk about functions. We've seen functions a lot in Python and Lua, and now I'm going to talk to you about how they're going to work in C#, and we're going to take some Lua functions and convert them over to C# so you can see what kind of things have to change. Now, functions work the same way. A function is a chunk of code that does something for you. That function can take inputs or parameters, and that function can return you a value or not. And this issue of strong typing is going to come into play again, because now what we have to do is, it's not just enough to say that this function takes parameters A, B, and C. We have to specify what those data types are. What type of data is A? What type of data is B? What type of data is C? And functions can return us back a value or not. And we have to specify now what type of data a function returns. If the function doesn't return anything, which is probably most of our functions, then the return type is void. Void is a keyword which means nothing. There is no return value from this function. So let's take a real simple Lua function here. This function is called print_sum, and it takes three parameters, A, B, and C, and it just prints them out. So this would work in Pico 8. If we passed it in, 1, 2, and 3, it would add those up and print out the number 6. So let's convert this to C#. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this end word here. So C# uses curly braces to group code together. So now we've got our function name, our parameter list, and then after that our code is going to be inside of curly braces, and our code is going to go inside of there. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And now, remember, we have to say what type of data is in A, what type of data is in B, what type of data is in C. So we're just like we did with our variables, we're going to put the data type right before that. So let's assume that these are all integers, that we're saying, hey, here's some integers, add them all up for me. So int A, int B, int C. A, B, and C contain integers. Could they contain other types? Sure. Do they all have to be integers? No. Does this function have to take parameters? No. But if you have a parameter, you have to specify what type of data that parameter contains. Now, we also have to say what type of data this function returns. Now, this function isn't returning a value. It's just printing something out. It's not like a math formula where we give it 4 numbers and it gives us back the distance or something like that. So this function doesn't return anything, so the return type is void. Void means there is no return value from this function. And now we're almost done. We just need to rewrite this print A, B, and C thing as C#, and we don't have print in C#, we have console.writeLine. So this will print out this, it'll add up A, B, and C and print it out. And notice here that we've got our semicolon on the end, right? Statements have to end in semicolons in C#. So that wasn't so bad, was it? Yeah, that was pretty bad. Okay, now how would you use this function in C#? The same way you would use it in any other language like Lua. So yeah, Lua or Python. So you use the function name followed by the parameters to the function. So this would drop the number 5 in, and that would become A. 10 would become B, and 12 would become C. This function would add them up and print it all out. So notice when you use the function, you don't need to specify. You don't have to put int 5, int 10. It's when you write the function that you have to specify the data types. And if this thing wants an int and you give it a string, the compiler will yell at you and it will stop you from doing a thing. So we'll have much better error checking now than we used to. All right, so let's look at another example here. Here's a function in Lua called compute_sum, and it takes 3 parameters A, B, and C, and it adds them up and returns that value. It gives you whoever's using that function this number back. I mean, it's kind of a silly function, but it's just an example. It takes in 3 numbers, adds them up, and then gives them back to you as the answer. So, and you know it's giving you an answer because there was the word return right here. It's giving you back an answer. It's returning a value. All right, so let's convert this to C#. So let's do what we did before. We're going to replace the end with our closing curly brace. We're gonna take our code and put it in the curly braces after the function name. And what else do we need to do? Well, we need our data types. So in this example, or in this line right here, let's get rid of our semicolon. We'll add that later. What we've done is we have put the word int before each one of our parameters. This means that A is an integer, B is an integer, and C is an integer. So we have now created a function called compute sum that takes 3 integer parameters. And now we know this function is going to return us a value. So let's replace function here. We're going to replace this word with a return type. And the return type is going to be integer. When you add up 3 integers, you get an integer. So the return type for this function will be an integer. There we go. So now we have said that this function returns an integer. And then finally, we need a semicolon on the end of this line here because C# statements end with semicolons. So let's throw a semicolon on there. Oops, and of course my slides are now out of order. These are integers, int A, B, and C. There we go, int. This is a function called compute sum that takes 3 parameters, each one of which is an integer, and returns you back an integer. And there's the one line of code that adds up A, B, and C and returns them back as a result. So there's an example of how this strong typing stuff comes into play with our functions. We need to explicitly state what are the data types of the parameters and what is the data type of the return value for this function. If there is one, if there isn't one, it's the word void. If it helps you think about it when you're writing this stuff, imagine if you were doing it in Lua, you'd have the word function, replace the word function with the return type. If the function returns nothing, it's void. If it's an integer or a string, then that's your return type. All right, now, how would we actually use this in practice? Well, let's make a little example here. Now, what I've done here is I've made an integer called sum. Make me an integer called sum, and then I'm going to call my compute sum function and drop in 10, 12, and 5. So remember that the equal sign means evaluate the expression on the right and assign that to the value or the variable on the left. So this drops 5, 12, 10, 12, and 5 into this function. So 10 drops down here and becomes A, 12 drops down and becomes B, 5 drops down and becomes C. We add them all up, and the return value comes back, and this evaluates, this becomes our return value. This becomes 27. We take 27 and stick it into our location called sum, and then we print it out. So there's an example of using a function that returns a value, and then we do something with that value. If a function returns a value, normally you want to do something with that value. The value may be like a mathematical result. It may be an object. Find me the closest thing to this point. Or it could be a true-false value that says whether something worked or not. Generally, if a function is going to return you a value, you want to do something with that value. If a function returns void, then you can't do something with the output of that function because there isn't any. All right, well, there's some examples of how the strong typing stuff changes how we write functions. Conceptually, they're all the same. We're just going to use our curly braces to group our code, and for our parameters, we have to specify what the data types are, and we have to specify what the return type is. If there's no return type, it's void. So that's what we're doing there, and that should be enough to kind of get us going with C#.